After meeting with the Wildcats on Zoom yesterday, the Hunter Dickinson to Kentucky hype is now more real than ever.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, I'm going to be taking another dive into the Hunter Dickinson saga as he has entered the transfer portal, exiting from Michigan, looking for a new home. The Kentucky Wildcats, at the very beginning of his transfer portal announcement, became contenders, and the longer he has stayed in the portal, the more possibility I think it has become. There's more of a possibility, rather, I should say, that he will join the Wildcats. Going to talk about the latest updates with his recruitment, so to speak. Also going to discuss the way too early top 25 released by 24/7 Sports. I am not going to spoil it if you've not already seen it, but I think you will be very surprised as to where 24/7 has the Kentucky Wildcats heading into 2024. And then finally, something I'm probably going to talk about at some point in the near future again. I want to kind of preview my thoughts on this today. Seth Greenberg expects, I guess, Oscar Tshiebwe to return to Kentucky. I'm going to give some thoughts on that later on in the show as well. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everybody out there that we are free and available on all platforms. Let's go ahead and get into it. Hunter Dickinson met with the Kentucky Wildcats on Zoom yesterday. It was reported by multiple sources. I'm not quite sure who had the first report. If I'm not mistaken, it was Jeff Goodman of Stadium. I may be off on that, but I believe he was the first one to report it. You look around right now, Dickinson being offered, I think, by a multitude of schools, a lot of schools in pursuit. We talked recently about the 5 teams that I think 4 or 5 teams could be legitimately in the running for his services, the Wildcats being one of them. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this has been now a, week or so since he decided to enter the portal, maybe a little bit less than that. Right now, we're looking at a situation with Ugonna Onyenso in the transfer portal where Kentucky could legitimately snatch this kid up. Now, we're going to talk later on the show about my thoughts on Oscar Tshiebwe, but as of right now, with Onyenso gone, which is something I initially didn't think was going to happen, you now find yourself in a situation at Kentucky where you do have to get a guy like Dickinson, or you do have to have a player like Tshiebwe return. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm not as fired up about Tshiebwe returning as I would be picking up a Kello Ware or maybe getting a Hunter Dickinson. Some of you may disagree with that. Some of you may agree with that. I think that it may be time for, especially with this roster next season, for Tshiebwe to move on. That's just my opinion. We'll dive into that later. Comparatively to a guy like Hunter Dickinson, who I think maybe fit the mold of next year's team just a little bit better. Now, he's not the perfect fit, but I think he fits it better. You're looking at a guy like him in the portal right now, and with Onyenso gone, I think this Wildcat staff is probably focusing not every bit of their attention on Hunter Dickinson right now, but I think they're focusing a good portion of it. I'm not quite sure what is currently valuable to Hunter Dickinson, what he wants to get out of his next stop in the transfer portal. But if it's the ability to contend for a title, I know some Kentucky fans may disagree with this. I think a lot of people could realistically argue with this, and I think that's fair. But looking at next year's roster makeup, you bring in a guy like Dickinson to be a veteran presence. You bring in maybe 1 or 2 more pieces. You have Antonio Reeves maybe come back. And I think that you've got a really nice blend there of talent and experience on your roster. And I think Dickinson would be in a great spot to help the Wildcats make a deep NCAA tournament run. If he's looking for a team to maybe help him develop just a little bit more or maybe get him ready for the NBA. I'm sure that there are multiple staffs out there that would be just as valuable as Kentucky when it comes to that, but I don't think it's hard to say that Kentucky's one of the stronger staffs when it comes to getting players through to the NBA. Maybe a little bit of a different case here considering Dickinson's already been in the college game for 3 seasons now, but you're looking at a situation where all signs point to Kentucky having reason to pursue him and Dickinson having reason to want to take a look with the Wildcats at the very least. And obviously, like we just said, he's already had a Zoom meeting with him. Now, I want to point out that Kentucky's not the only team that this kid is going to meet with. Arkansas also scheduled a meeting with Hunter Dickinson. And then the few teams that we talked about on the other on an episode as of late, Maryland is a team that could be looking at him. Georgetown, Syracuse, Duke, Kansas, those are all other teams that could be potentially looking at Hunter Dickinson and maybe not realistically having a shot of landing him compared to maybe Kentucky. But I do think that they are certainly in the running right now. I think Syracuse and Kansas are 2 really, really interesting spots for him to land potentially. And then Maryland, if I'm not mistaken, and Georgetown, they have some type of like coaching relationship with Dickinson. So there's a lot I think that needs to happen over the next couple weeks before he makes his final decision. And then Arkansas coming into the fold. I mean, we've seen Arkansas take all sorts of transfer portal talent and make it a prominent feature on what has been 3 straight Sweet 16 trips at the very minimum for the Razorbacks. I believe they had 2 back-to-back Elite 8 appearances in the NCAA tournament. So if he's looking to maybe be that guy for the Razorbacks next year, I think he could make that work. I don't know what the status of Mekhi Mitchell or whatever Mitchell brother is the center there currently for the Razorbacks, but yeah, you're looking at a spot right now where Kentucky, I think, feels comfortable or confident in their ability to land this kid. They've already had a meeting with him. I'm curious to see what the updates are that come out of that. But right now, I think as Kentucky fans, you have to feel excited about where that's going. If you want to give your thoughts on where you think Hunter Dickinson's going to land, if you think that potentially he would be a good fit or a bad fit for Kentucky, I want you to drop it in the comments below, or if you're listening on YouTube, and if you're watching on podcast. Wow, if you're listening on podcast, you can hit us at Locked On UK on Twitter to share your thoughts about Hunter Dickinson. If you got any questions on him as well, you can make sure to hit me there as well. All right, want to talk about where 24/7 Sports has Kentucky heading into the 2024 season. It's an interesting spot where 24/7 has the Wildcats. I was shocked to see this. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All you have to do is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. They've also got player props. They've got points, rebounds, assists, all that good stuff. So many more exclusive bets on top of that. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. If you've not subscribed already to the YouTube channel, if you're watching there, would greatly appreciate if you did so. For those of you that have subscribed as of late, thank you for hopping on the train. I really appreciate you guys joining us here. Off-season content's going to be a lot of fun. Talking about the transfer portal, what Kentucky needs, what they will get, I think is going to be very exciting. Going to be talking about recruiting as well. Some recruiting news actually coming out as I started to record this episode about Kentucky maybe making some top fives for different people. I believe Jet Diallo, or I cannot remember his name right now. I'm so sorry. But Kentucky, I believe, is going to be attending one of his games tonight. Although Diallo said that he wasn't, Kentucky wasn't in his top teams, but, they are taking a look at him right now. So really eager to see what some of the things Kentucky does on the recruiting trail for next year. I think it's going to be really interesting to keep tabs on. As of right now, though, Kentucky, I think most of you would agree, is a top 25 team heading into next year. If you disagree with that, I want you to go ahead and tell me right now, not just that you disagree with it, I want to hear why. I want you to tell me why. So again, I'm going to call out one more time. If you are listening on YouTube, drop a comment. Tell me why you think Kentucky's not a top 25 team. If you are listening on podcast, at Locked On UK on Twitter, I want you to at me or I want you to DM me. I want you to explain your thought process as to why you think Kentucky's not a top 25 team. Because I do. I think when you look at their roster next season, if they add a couple more pieces to the transfer portal, I think they're easily a top 15 team. I think you could make an argument that they could be top 10, depending on how things go. You've got Rob Dillingham at your point guard. You got DJ Wagner at your shooting guard. Justin Edwards at small forward. Either Chris Livingston or Antonio Reeves potentially coming back to play small forward as well. You've got Aaron Bradshaw. Damian Collins might enter the transfer portal. Onyenzo's gone, so you're looking for a center. You're looking for a backup small forward. You're maybe looking for somebody to be your backup power forward as well. If you are able to help fill out the front court and maybe that 3 spot, I think Kentucky is definitely a top 15 team. I think that they're able to contend in the SEC next year. I think they'll be one of the favorites to win it, if not the favorite. It's just a lot of talent, a lot of offensive prowess that's coming to the Bluegrass State next year. So I think Kentucky's in the mix. 24/7 Sports, I want to run through their top 25 here real quick. At number 1 for next season, and keep in mind, these are way too early top 25 projections, so they acknowledge that. They're probably going to be a little bit different by the time basketball season rolls around. You've got Duke at number 1, Marquette at number 2, you've got the reigning national champion, UConn at number 3, Creighton at number 4. I can only assume that projection will change because their point guard, Ryan Nembhard, just entered the transfer portal. You've got Houston at number 5, Purdue at 6, Texas at 7, Miami at 8, Arkansas at 9, and then Florida Atlantic after their Final Four run at number 10. They're going to be returning a lot of players from that team. I can only assume that's why they get that ranking. UCLA, Michigan State, Kansas, Gonzaga, and Alabama round out the top 15. Then you've got Arizona, Baylor, Tennessee, TCU, and St. Mary's as the 16 through 20 teams. Then to round out the top 25, at number 21, you've got Missouri. Number 22, you've got Texas A&M. 23 is North Carolina. 24 is Maryland. And 25 is Colorado, who apparently brings back a lot of experience and then brings in TCU transfer Eddie Lampkin. And just to reiterate here real quick, this is the 24/7 Sports way too early top 25. Now, there are a couple of others out there. But what do you notice? Kentucky's not in their top 25. They're just straight up not in it. Now, they have a list of 15 more teams to watch. Auburn, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa State, Kansas State, Kentucky, Ohio State, Oregon, Providence, Rutgers, San Diego State, USC, Utah State, Villanova, Xavier. Yada, 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 yada. I think Xavier probably has a better argument for the top 25 than half of these teams. But this is what 24/7 Sports says about Kentucky. The Wildcats should get Antonio Reeves and CJ Frederick back, but lose a key number of pieces. The good news is Kentucky brings in 24/7 Sports' top-ranked recruiting class, but Kentucky will need to land some haymakers in the portal for more proven players. Couple of things here. First of all, it doesn't look like it's a surefire bet that Antonio Reeves is coming back, as he has declared for the draft while maintaining his eligibility. CJ Frederick, I don't really know how much he matters if he comes back next year. I don't know what he can do for this team that the rest of the backcourt can. You're going to have Rob Dillingham and Adu Thiero. You're going to have DJ Wagner and Reed Shepherd. All 4 of those guys can handle the ball. All 4 of those guys can score. What else do you want out of your backcourt? You don't need a CJ Frederick. You don't. Reed Shepherd's your shooter. And on top of that, I think he's a more athletic player. And if you want to say, well, maybe he slides down to small forward, I would much rather have a player out of the transfer portal that doesn't shoot as poorly. I mean, that's just the way I'm looking at it right now. I would love for CJ Frederick to return and prove me wrong and go back to being that 40% three-point shooter that he was advertised as before he played at Kentucky. But he's been injury prone. He's not done anything for the Wildcats. I don't understand why that's being advertised here by 24/7. It almost feels like whoever did this list didn't really do their due diligence in breaking down some of these different rosters. Now, I understand that it's very difficult to keep up with everything. But as one of the biggest sports websites out there, I'm surprised that 24/7 didn't put more effort into, I think, paying attention to some of these different rosters. I think there are a few teams here and on the fringe of the top 25 that should either be higher or just be out of it completely. I think Kentucky is a team that is severely underranked in their way too early top 25 as like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, 6th team on the 15 more to watch. So that's essentially putting them at number 31. I think that's ridiculous. And then putting a team like Xavier at the very bottom, I think Villanova will always be in the conversation for the top 25. San Diego State is bringing back quite a few pieces. They just made the national championship game. For them to just completely not be in the top 25 is very surprising. I feel like they could have done a bit of a better job with this, is what I'm trying to say here. Kentucky not being in the top 25 is like, I bet some people out there that are not Kentucky fans that would hear that be like, oh, they're so stuck up and they're so spoiled and privileged in the way that they think about things. If I was bringing in the number one class in the nation, I would assume that would at least garner a number 25 ranking. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got 4 or 5 stars and a 4-star coming in, and they are expected to play and contribute and play very well, given their ranking, you add a couple of pieces through the portal, I think this ranking will go up for 24/7 if that happens, if Kentucky lands Hunter Dickinson. But as it stands, I'm a little confused. Now, this was 3 days ago, so this was before Ugonna Onyenso left and entered the transfer portal. This is before Kentucky met with Hunter Dickinson, but this is a little confusing. It's a little confusing. You can check that out over at 24/7. Just literally search up college basketball way too early top 25, and you'll find it. And you can look through yourself. See where everybody's at in case you didn't hear it while I was reading through there. There's one more thing I want to get to before we wrap up the show. Before I do that, just want to remind you guys, if you've not subscribed already, I'm going to continue to ask. So hopefully you guys don't get annoyed by this. Please go ahead, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're watching, by the way, if you've been consistently watching and you have not subscribed to the show, there's no reason why you shouldn't have. Join the club. Hop on the bandwagon. If you want to ask me some questions, leave them in the YouTube comments below. If you want to talk to me on Twitter, you can hit me there as well. Probably going to have some posts to go out on Twitter and on YouTube, just kind of get your thoughts on some things as we get deeper into April here. So yeah, make sure you stick around. Subscribe and follow wherever you are listening. Podcast, YouTube, doesn't matter. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Seth Greenberg of ESPN, I think, does a good job. I think he's one of the better analysts out there. I appreciate he doesn't annoy me. He doesn't frustrate me. I don't dislike him. But what I'm about to say here, I hope doesn't end up being too critical. So Seth Greenberg, again of ESPN, was on the Dan Patrick Show just a few days ago. And on the show, he was talking about what Coach Cal and Kentucky should be doing for the roster makeup next year. And they were having a conversation about one-and-done players not being the key to winning national titles. All fair conversation. And this is what Greenberg said at one point in the interview. And this is a direct quote. That's why he's got to compliment it in the transfer portal. He's got to get Oscar Tshiebwe to come back, first and foremost, which I think he will end up coming back. So, notice there that this is not a conversation that you and I are having about Greenberg saying, He needs to have Tshiebwe come back. He first identified the fact that Tshiebwe needs to come back for this roster, and then also pointed out, I think that's going to happen. He went on to say, if Tshiebwe returns, he's got to do more. Calipari has to do more to get some players through the portal. He's got to complement DJ Wagner in that recruiting class, Greenberg said. He's got to complement them with juniors and seniors that will be great role players. Juniors and seniors in the portal that basically coach their locker room. You're only as good as your locker room. Whatever we do, you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. I think that both of those things are phenomenal points. Something that we've continued to talk about here. How much does Kentucky need Oscar Tshiebwe to come back as opposed to another big man who is better defensively that was statistically scoring 15 to 16 a game, just as much as Tshiebwe was last year? Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there that love Tshiebwe. I do too. I think that he is the best rebounder maybe in the game of college basketball, period. Full stop. One of the best, if not the best, especially in the modern era. He was dominant last year. Very dominant. But it's very clear what some of his shortcomings were as a player. As a person, I think he's top-notch. As a player, though, I think it's very clear that his defense, his communication on that end of the floor, and I don't want to say his IQ, but it felt like way too many times last year, Tshiebwe just couldn't defend the pick and roll. He'd either get caught out of position or he couldn't finish the job whenever an opposing player was taking a shot against him. Now, I want to point something out here as well as we continue along through the Tshiebwe conversation. Not every single person is going to be Anthony Davis. Not every single person is going to be able to block half the shots that go up, and if they don't block it, they're contending the shot, and it ends up being a miss. Not everybody's going to be Rudy Gobert, right? But this is something that a lot of people were talking. This was not just a me thing. This was not just a you thing. This was something that we had identified as a fan base, and then in the media sphere had identified, and were being critical of. It's not like it's something that can just be excused. It's not like it's something that can just be consistently offset by, oh, well, he's a great rebounder, though. He is a great rebounder. He won that game in the NCAA tournament against Providence. He won that game. He played very well against Kansas State, if my memory serves me right. Kentucky needs better interior defense. Do they get that with Hunter Dickinson? Again, we talked about Sean Venzel putting out that newsletter, breaking that down. Not the best pick and roll defender either, but he's 7'1", and I think that if you're comparing him to Tshiebwe and what he would do for this roster next year, they both would provide a veteran presence, I think. I think both of them would do something individually very well. I think Dickinson would be a good scorer. I think that Tshiebwe would be a solid rebounder, an elite rebounder, that is. But I think Dickinson would be better served as the interior defender, considering he has, 3 inches of height on him? And if not Dickinson, go get somebody like Kello Ware from Oregon, somebody that can defend the rim. And on top of that is 7 feet tall. Kentucky's got options. This is just my opinion. I'm pointing this out. Kentucky's got options. And I disagree with Seth Greenberg in saying that Oscar Tshiebwe will end up coming back to Kentucky. And on top of this, I don't know if Kentucky needs Oscar Tshiebwe to come back. Would it be a benefit to next year's team? Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the former National Player of the Year coming back for yet another season is a bad thing. I'm just sitting here saying, compared to a couple of other options in the transfer portal, given what we saw last year, I think that there may be some better fits for next year's roster. I also think that regardless of whether or not Tshiebwe comes back, Kentucky has to go find somebody with some height and some defense that can control the paint whenever Tshiebwe's not out there. Onyenso was supposed to be that guy at times last year. We did not get to see him as much as we thought, and so he left. Understandably so. So if Tshiebwe comes back, if he doesn't, it doesn't really matter what my thoughts are, what Greenberg's thoughts are. I think that all of us would agree Kentucky needs better rim defenders. And the more likely scenario, instead of him returning, is Kentucky going to get a player in the portal that does that. Or going to get Dickinson. Or maybe getting 2 players in the front court. Who knows? I think Greenberg does make a phenomenal point, saying you need juniors and seniors that are role players that can coach your locker room. You're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. That is a great thought, not just for basketball, but for life as well. I don't think Tshiebwe's coming back. And I don't think Kentucky needs to have him come back. That's my thought on that. If you disagree, if you think that is awful, if you agree, if you think that's great, again, I want to ask you guys, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Once again, you can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter as well at LanceDawe_. You can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns? Once again, leave them in the YouTube comments. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.